I needed to drive my 82-year-old mom to the hospital. My car was in the shop. When I asked my wife for hers, she said, "Not my problem. Figure it out." I just replied, "Okay." The next day. She called me 31 times. She called me 31 times the next day. By the 15th call, her voice had shifted from irritation to panic. By the 23rd, it had turned into something I had never heard in nearly 3 decades of marriage fear. I watched her name light up my phone screen again and again while I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of black coffee growing cold in my hand. The strange thing is, none of it would have happened if she had simply handed me her car keys. Instead, she looked at me that morning and said 5 words that still echo in my head, like a door slamming shut. "Not my problem. Figure it out." It was 6:40 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of my mother coughing in the guest room down the hall. It wasn't an ordinary cough. It was tight, strained, the kind that made you sit upright in bed without thinking. My mother is 82 years old, 2 stances, mild heart failure, a medication list longer than most restaurant menus. She's lived with us since my father passed 3 years ago. Most days, she moved slowly but steadily. That morning, she couldn't catch her breath. I helped her sit up. Her hands felt cold. Her skin had that pale gray tone I've learned not to ignore. "Let's not wait," she whispered. I already knew. I grabbed my phone to call her cardiologist's office. They told me to bring her in immediately. And that's when I remembered. My car was still in the shop. Transmission failure. 4th day waiting on parts. I had complained about it just the night before while Laura, my wife, barely looked up from her tablet. Laura's SUV sat in the driveway, practically brand new, fully paid off. I walked into the kitchen where she was scrolling through something on her phone, her coffee steaming beside her. "Laura," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Mom needs to get to the hospital. My car is still in the shop. Can I take yours?" She didn't look up right away, just swiped once more on the screen. "I have Pilates at 9 o'clock, she said flatly. "I'll have it back before then." That's when she looked at me and I saw it. Not anger, not stress, indifference. "Not my problem," she said, lifting her mug. "Figure it out." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. "My mom can't breathe." She shrugged. "Then call an Uber." I stood there longer than I care to admit, waiting for the punchline, waiting for the softness to return to her eyes. It didn't. So I nodded. "Okay," I said. That was it. No shouting, no arguing, just that one word. "Okay." Our neighbor Frank drove us to the hospital. The whole ride, I stared out the window while Mom rested her head back against the seat. "Was that Laura?" she asked quietly. I kept my eyes forward. "She has a busy morning," I replied. Mom didn't say anything else, but I felt the weight of her silence. At the hospital, the test began immediately. EKG blood work, oxygen monitoring. I stayed by her side the entire time. It wasn't a heart attack, thankfully. Fluid buildup, medication adjustment, close call. But something else had shifted inside me that morning. Something quiet, something permanent. Laura texted once around noon. "Everything fine." I stared at the message. No apology, no concern, just efficiency. "She's stable," I replied. A thumbs up emoji came back. That was it. That evening when we returned home, Laura was sitting at the kitchen island. "How is she?" she asked without turning around. "Stable?" I said. She nodded. "Good." I stood there for a moment studying her. 28 years of marriage. We'd built this house together, raised 2 stepchildren from her first marriage. Shared holidays, shared funerals, shared retirement plans. And yet, that morning, when it mattered most, she had drawn a line I hadn't known existed. "Not my problem. Figure it out." The words weren't loud. They weren't dramatic. They were cold. And they told me something I hadn't allowed myself to see. I wasn't her partner anymore. I was her responsibility. And responsibilities can be declined. That night after Laura went to bed, I sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I opened my laptop. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe I just needed something solid, something factual, something that didn't depend on emotion. So, I logged into our joint bank account. And that's when I saw it. Transfers I didn't recognize, large ones, frequent ones. I leaned closer to the screen. My pulse slowed instead of quickened because suddenly the morning made sense. And for the first time all day, I didn't feel hurt. I felt clear. The next morning, Laura called me 31 times. But that was later. First came the numbers. And numbers, unlike words, don't lie. If you had asked me a year ago whether I trusted my wife, I would have said yes without hesitation. Not the reckless kind of trust you see in young couples who still believe love alone can carry a mortgage. I'm 68 years old. My trust was the kind built through decades of routine shared calendars, shared passwords, shared doctor appointments. The quiet confidence that comes from surviving things together. Or at least that's what I believed. Laura and I married when I was 40. She had 2 children from her first marriage. I had just made senior partner at the accounting firm where I worked for 35 years. She was warm back then, charismatic, the kind of woman who could host Thanksgiving for 20 people without breaking a sweat. She stopped working 12 years ago. It doesn't make sense for both of us to kill ourselves, she had said. You make more anyway. I didn't argue. I was proud to provide. It felt like purpose. Over time, I moved my paycheck into our joint account. I added her as an authorized user on every credit card. When I retired at 65, I rolled my pension and 401k into accounts managed under both our names. It never crossed my mind that I should do otherwise. Looking back, I can see the subtle shifts. They weren't dramatic enough to alarm me, just small adjustments in tone. When I hesitated over a large purchase, she'd say, "You worry too much." When I asked about a charge I didn't recognize, she'd smile and say, "Relax. It's handled." When I suggested meeting with a financial advisor together, she'd respond, "You're the numbers guy. I trust you." Trust that word again. But somewhere along the way, I stopped reviewing statements as carefully. Retirement changes you. You begin to value peace more than precision. And Laura valued comfort. The house renovations, the vacations with her friends, the investment opportunities that never seemed to produce returns. I questioned some of it, but not enough because challenging her meant friction, and friction at our age feels exhausting. After her words that morning, "Not my problem. Figure it out." I couldn't sleep. So, I did something I hadn't done in months. I combed through the accounts. The first transfer I noticed was from 4 months ago. $8,500 wired to an unfamiliar business account labeled consulting. The next month, $12,000 investment seed, then $6,200 withdrawn in cash. My stomach didn't drop the way it might have when I was younger. Instead, I felt a strange steadiness. I pulled up the credit card statements. Designer purchases totaling over $14,000 in the past year. Jewelry, weekend spa packages, a boutique travel agency. That SUV in the driveway, it wasn't fully paid off after all. It was financed through a separate line of credit I hadn't known existed. A line of credit tied to our home equity. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. For 28 years, I believed we were making decisions together. Now, I saw the pattern. The transfers weren't random. They were escalating. $8,500, $12,000, $15,000. Like someone building a parachute in secret. I opened another tab and checked the property records online. The deed to our house was still jointly held. Good. But the SUV loan listed only her name. That was new. I scrolled further. 3 inquiries on her credit report, business loan applications dated within the last 60 days. The day she told me my mother's emergency wasn't her problem, she already had 1 foot outside our marriage, and I had been the one funding the exit. I sat there until 2 o'clock in the morning. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I replayed the last few years in my mind. The way she'd started taking phone calls in another room, the new friends I'd never met, the sudden insistence that she needed financial independence. I had interpreted it as healthy autonomy. Now, it looked like preparation. The painful part wasn't the money. It was the realization that while I was thinking about cardiologist appointments and medication refills for my 82-year-old mother, my wife was thinking about liquidity. I heard her footsteps in the hallway and quickly closed the laptop. She appeared at the doorway, robe wrapped tightly around her. "Why are you up?" she asked. "Couldn't sleep." She nodded, then paused. "You seem distant today." I looked at her carefully. "I was thinking," I said. "About what?" "Responsibility." She frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "Nothing," I replied. She studied me for another moment, then shrugged and went back to bed. That shrug, that same shrug from the morning. It wasn't cruelty. It was dismissal. The next day, while she was at Pilates, I called my former colleague, Daniel. He'd been my financial advisor for years before I retired. "Dan," I said, "I need to review everything." He didn't ask many questions, just scheduled me for the following morning. When I hung up, I walked past the kitchen island where she had sat the day before. I imagined the moment again. My mother struggling to breathe. Me asking for help, her lifting her coffee mug. "Not my problem. Figure it out." The sentence hadn't just revealed her indifference. It had revealed mine. I had ignored warning signs for years because confronting them felt inconvenient. But something about that morning had stripped away the comfort of denial. If I could drive my mother to the hospital without her help, I could do something else, too. I could figure this out. When Laura called me 31 times the next day, she thought it was about inconvenience. She didn't yet understand it was about exposure, and numbers once uncovered don't go back into hiding. Daniel didn't waste time with small talk. When I walked into his office the next morning, he closed the door behind me and said, "Start from the beginning." So, I did. I told him about my mother, about the car, about Laura's words. Then, I slid a printed stack of statements across his desk. He adjusted his glasses and began flipping through them slowly at first, then faster. "How long since you've reviewed these line by line?" he asked. "Not in detail," I admitted. 6 months, maybe more." He nodded. "Retirement can do that." He opened his laptop and logged into the back-end access he still had permission to use for my managed accounts. Within 10 minutes, he found what I had sensed, but not yet fully understood. "She's been moving liquidity," he said calmly. "Meaning, cash positions, short-term transfers, credit expansion. She's increasing available funds while limiting traceable long-term commitments." I stared at him. "In English, she's preparing for financial separation." The word hung in the air. Separation. Not divorce. Not yet. Preparation. Daniel continued scrolling here. "Home equity line of credit opened 8 months ago, authorized by both of you electronically." I frowned. "I don't remember signing that." "You likely approved something in DocuSign without reading the secondary documents." I closed my eyes briefly. I remembered the evening she'd said it was paperwork to update insurance beneficiaries. I'd signed from my phone while watching television. Daniel turned the screen toward me. $42,000 drawn from the line over the past 7 months. "That money didn't go toward the house," he said. "Where did it go?" "Combination of personal transfers and something else." He clicked again. 3 deposits into a newly formed LLC registered solely under Laura's name. The company address was a co-working space downtown. "What is this?" I asked quietly. "Looks like she started a consulting business." I laughed once under my breath. Laura had never run a business in her life. "She's listed as majority owner," Daniel added. "How much has she moved into it?" He totaled the transfers. I sat back in the chair. The SUV loan, the equity line, the LLC, the withdrawals. It wasn't panic spending. It was positioning. "She hasn't touched your 401k. Daniel said, "That's good. It's protected unless you authorize distribution." "What about Social Security?" "Still depositing into the joint account." I exhaled slowly. "So, what are my options?" Daniel folded his hands. "First, separate your income immediately. Open an individual account. Redirect your Social Security. Freeze the home equity line. Remove her as authorized user on any credit cards issued under your name. Then, consult an attorney." "Will that escalate things?" He gave me a look I recognized from years of negotiations. "It's already escalated. You're just late to the meeting." I drove home with a strange calmness settling over me. There's something clarifying about numbers. They remove ambiguity. They don't care about tone or excuses. Laura wasn't acting impulsively. She was executing a plan. And I had funded it. When I walked into the house, she was at the counter again, laptop open this time. "How was your morning?" she asked. "Productive." She smiled faintly. "I'm working on something new." "Oh, a business idea." "Consulting." "It's early stages." I nodded. "Sounds expensive." She paused for a fraction of a second. "Investment requires capital." "Yes," I agreed quietly. "It does." She studied my face. "You're being strange." "Am I?" "Yes. Ever since yesterday, I met her eyes. Yesterday was clarifying." "For what? Do for me?" She closed her laptop slowly. "Are you upset about the car?" "No." "Then what?" I considered telling her right then, laying out the numbers, confronting her. But something inside me held back. "Not fear. Timing." "I figured it out," I said simply. She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I don't need the SUV." Her expression softened slightly as if she believed the storm had passed. "Good," she said, "because I have meetings all week." That afternoon, I opened a new checking account in my name only. I redirected my Social Security deposits effective immediately. I called the bank and froze the home equity line pending review. The representative asked, "Ross on unauthorized financial exposure," I replied. I removed her authorization from 2 credit cards tied to my retirement account. Each action felt methodical, Controlled, not revenge, protection. By evening, the bank notified me that pending transactions linked to the equity line were suspended. At 9:12 p.m., Laura's phone buzzed. I watched her face change as she read the notification email. "What is this?" she asked sharply. "What is what?" "It says the equity line is frozen." "Yes. Why?" "Risk management." She stood up. "You can't just freeze it without talking to me." "I can," I said calmly. "It's in my name. It's in our name." "It was," I corrected. Her jaw tightened. "You're overreacting." "Am I?" "This is about yesterday." "No," I said quietly. "Yesterday was about something else." She stared at me, searching for emotion. But there wasn't anger there anymore. Only calculation. She picked up her phone and walked into the bedroom, closing the door behind her. I sat alone in the living room. 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I didn't answer. Then another, then a text. "Did you freeze the account?" I set the phone down because the next part required patience. And when the calls came the following day, 31 of them, they weren't about a hospital visit. They were about leverage. And for the first time in years, I understood exactly who had it. Laura didn't scream that night. She didn't throw anything. Didn't accuse me of betrayal. Didn't even cry. She calculated. That's what made it different. I heard her moving around in the bedroom long after midnight, drawers, opening papers, shifting the soft tap of her phone keyboard. When she finally came out around 1 a.m., I pretended to be asleep on the couch. She stood over me for a moment, watching, measuring. Then she went back inside. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't doubt myself either. There's a certain clarity that comes when denial finally dissolves. Not rage, not heartbreak, just clarity. The next morning at exactly 7:18 a.m., my phone buzzed. Call number 1, Laura. I let it ring. Call number 2. Then number 3. By the time I reached the bank parking lot at 8:05, I had 7 missed calls. I didn't feel triumph. I felt confirmation. Inside the branch, I requested a meeting with the senior account manager, a woman in her early 50s named Michelle, composed and direct. "How can we help you today, Mr. Thompson? I need to review asset ownership and freeze any outgoing transfers above $5,000 without dual authorization." She typed quietly. "Are you anticipating litigation?" "Possibly," she nodded. "You'll want documentation of recent withdrawals and credit extensions." "I already have them." She looked up at me, studying my face. "Is this a divorce?" "It's a correction," I replied. She didn't ask further. Within 30 minutes, the equity line was officially suspended pending internal review. Alerts were placed on all accounts. Large transfers required in-person authorization. My individual account was fully activated. When I walked back to my car, my phone showed 15 missed calls. And 1 voicemail. Her voice was controlled at first. "David called me back. There's clearly a mistake with the bank." By the end of the message, the control had thinned. "You can't just do this." At 9:30 a.m., I met with an attorney. Daniel had recommended Susan Myers, family law specialist, 20 years of practice. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back. "Your wife has been repositioning assets." Quietly. "Yes." "You've frozen liquidity before she completed the transition." "Yes," she nodded. "That explains the phone calls." "What are my risks?" I asked. "If she files first, she'll argue financial abuse. I've transferred nothing to myself beyond my earned income. Good documentation is your shield." She tapped her pen lightly against her notebook. "Let me ask you something, Mr. Thompson." "Why now?" I thought about that. Because it wasn't just about money. It wasn't the transfers. I said finally it was the sentence. She raised an eyebrow. "What sentence?" "Not my problem." "Figure it out." Susan's expression shifted slightly. "That tends to be the moment," she said quietly. "The moment when one spouse stops seeing the other as a partner." I nodded. "What are my options?" "You can file for legal separation, protect your retirement accounts, establish temporary financial boundaries, or you can attempt mediation." I don't think she wants mediation. "Then protect yourself first." When I got home, Laura was sitting at the kitchen island again. But she wasn't scrolling this time. She was waiting. Her eyes were sharp. "What did you do?" she asked without greeting. I adjusted risk exposure. She stood up. "Stop talking like that. This isn't a boardroom." "No," I agreed calmly. "It's our house." "You froze the equity line." "Yes." "You removed me from the cards." "Yes." "You redirected your Social Security." "Yes." She blinked once, clearly surprised I wasn't denying it. You don't trust me. The question almost made me smile. I trusted you, I said evenly. That's how the equity line got open. Her face hardened. You're overreacting to one comment. One comment, I repeated. You're punishing me because I had a class scheduled. This isn't about Pilates. Then what is it about? I held her gaze. It's about partnership. Silence stretched between us. You're trying to control me, she said finally. No, I replied. I'm removing the ability to control me. Her jaw tightened. You can't just rewrite the rules after 28 years. I didn't, I said quietly. You did. She laughed once, sharp, dismissive. Oh, please. Because I didn't drop everything to drive your mother. It wasn't about driving. Then what? It was about caring. She folded her arms. So, this is emotional now. No, I said calmly. This is structural. Her eyes flashed. Are you threatening divorce? I'm protecting what's mine. And what's mine? She snapped. You'll keep what you've positioned already. The color drained slightly from her face. You've been digging. I've been reading. She stared at me for several seconds. You're being paranoid. No, I said softly. I was being naive. That afternoon, I filed for legal separation, not divorce. Protection. Temporary financial boundaries pending mediation. The paperwork was precise, clinical, lacking drama. When the process server delivered the notice 2 days later, I wasn't home. But I heard about it because that was the day she called me 31 times. And the first 20 of those calls weren't angry. They were afraid. There's a difference between revenge and recalibration. Revenge is loud. Recalibration is quiet. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I adjusted. And once the system shifted, she felt it immediately because for the first time in 28 years, she couldn't simply assume I would absorb the impact. The process server knocked at 10:17 a.m. I know the time because Laura texted me at 10:19. What did you do? I didn't answer. By 10:22, she called. Call number 1. I watched it ring. Call number 2. Then number 3. By 11 a.m., I had 11 missed calls and 6 messages. The first few were controlled. David, we need to talk. This is ridiculous. You're escalating this unnecessarily. By call 15, the tone shifted. You can't file separation without discussing it. You're embarrassing both of us. And then around call 22, something new entered her voice. Uncertainty. What exactly are you trying to protect? I sat at my desk in the den reviewing retirement projections with Daniel on speakerphone and let the phone vibrate against the wood. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. When you live long enough, you learn something about power. It's rarely about volume. It's about leverage. For nearly 3 decades, Laura had operated from the assumption that I would maintain stability no matter what she did. That I would smooth over tension, cover expenses, ignore irregularities. She had grown accustomed to elasticity, but elasticity has limits, and once it snaps back, it changes shape. At 1:14 p.m., she showed up at Daniel's office. He texted me immediately. She's here agitated. I told him not to engage beyond confirming that I had sought consultation. Apparently, she demanded access to statements. Daniel told her what any advisor would say. You'll need to go through your attorney. That was when the panic truly began. Because panic isn't about money. It's about control. By late afternoon, I finally answered. Call number 31. Her breathing was uneven. David, she said, her voice tight. What is happening? You were served, I replied evenly. Legal separation. Are you serious? Yes, you're blowing up our life. No, I said quietly. I'm stabilizing mine. This is about your mother. It started there. So, because I told you to handle something yourself, you're dismantling 28 years. No, I said, because I realized I've been handling everything myself. Silence. You think I was stealing from you? She asked finally. I think you were preparing for something without telling me. That's called independence. Not when it's funded by joint equity without transparency. She exhaled sharply. You're acting like I committed a crime. You opened a $42,000 credit line against our home. It's our home and you didn't discuss it. I signed you electronically. Yes, I said calmly. You did. The pause that followed was heavy. You trusted me, she said. I did, and now you don't. Now I verify. That evening when I returned home, she was pacing. The house felt different, charged. I spoke to an attorney, she said immediately. I assumed you would. You're going to regret this. Possibly. She stared at me as if waiting for anger, for retaliation. It didn't come. You froze the equity line. You removed me from accounts. You cut off access. I restricted unsecured liquidity. That's the same thing. No, I replied evenly. It's containment. She shook her head. You're trying to starve me out. I'm preventing further exposure. She laughed bitterly. Exposure to what? Your retirement paranoia to undisclosed liability. Her voice dropped. You've been watching me. I've been reviewing statements. You think I was leaving you? I think you were preparing options. And that scares you. No, I said. What scared me was a sentence. Her jaw tightened. You're still on that? Yes. It was a bad morning. It was a clear one. She looked at me for a long moment. You know what this looks like? She said quietly. Financial abuse. I nodded slowly. And that's exactly why I filed legally. Her expression flickered because she understood. Documentation changes narratives. Over the next 2 weeks, mediation was scheduled. Assets were outlined. Retirement accounts separate and protected. Home jointly held subject to evaluation. Equity line suspended pending court review. Her LLC entirely hers with no further funding from marital assets. The SUV solely her responsibility for the first time. The structure was visible. No ambiguity, no quiet transfers, no blurred lines. The strangest part wasn't the tension. It was the calm. I drove my mother to her follow-up appointment the following Tuesday in a rental car I paid for myself. When we returned home, she studied my face. You look lighter, she said. I feel clearer, I replied. Is it over? She asked gently. No, I said. It's balanced. That night, Laura slept in the guest room. We moved around each other carefully, civilly, but something fundamental had shifted. Not hostility, hierarchy. She was no longer operating from assumed leverage. She was negotiating from equal footing. And that's when the anger truly surfaced. Because equality feels like loss to someone accustomed to advantage. 3 days before our first mediation session, she stood in the doorway of the den. You didn't have to humiliate me, she said. I didn't. You served me at home. That's how the process works. You could have warned me. I did, I replied. When I said okay, she stared at me, confusion and realization colliding in her expression. You're punishing me. No, I said quietly. I figured it out. Reversal isn't loud. It doesn't slam doors. It doesn't throw accusations. It changes the structure underneath the floorboards. And when the foundation shifts, everyone feels it. Especially the one who thought it was permanent. Mediation was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a gray Thursday morning. Laura arrived 10 minutes late. Not rushed, not flustered, controlled. She wore the navy blazer she used to wear to charity events, the one that signaled composure and confidence. If you didn't know the context, you'd think we were attending a real estate closing together. We sat across from each other at a long conference table. Between us paperwork, behind us 28 years. The mediator, a man in his early 60s named Richard, opened the session with neutral language. This is a structured discussion regarding financial separation and asset protection. Our goal is clarity. Clarity, that word again. Richard reviewed the preliminary financial summary. Joint home value, retirement accounts, equity line status, her LLC filings, outstanding debt. When he reached the section detailing the credit line withdrawals, he paused. Mrs. Thompson, he said carefully, these funds were accessed without prior documented discussion. Laura crossed her legs. We have shared finances. We don't ask permission for every expense. $42,000 isn't an expense, I said calmly. It's a position. She shot me a look. Richard raised a hand gently. Let's stay constructive. He turned to her again. What was the intended use of these funds? Business development for which there are no revenue reports yet. It's early stage. He nodded, then wrote something down. When we moved to the equity line freeze, she leaned forward. He froze it without consulting me. Yes, Richard said, but he did so legally. She turned to me. You embarrassed me at the bank. You embarrassed me at the kitchen table, I replied evenly. The room went quiet. Richard looked between us. Would you like to elaborate? Laura scoffed softly. He's referring to a comment I made. It wasn't the comment I said. It was what it revealed. She rolled her eyes. This is absurd. Is it? I asked quietly. You're dismantling our marriage because I didn't reschedule Pilates. I met her gaze. It wasn't about Pilates. Then what was it about? It was about responsibility. The word landed between us. For a moment, I saw something crack beneath her composure. Not guilt, recognition. Mediation lasted 4 hours. By the end, the temporary structure was outlined. I retained sole control over my retirement accounts. She maintained full ownership of her LLC and its liabilities. The home would remain jointly owned pending appraisal and potential buyout. The equity line would remain frozen unless both parties signed for reinstatement. Separate checking accounts would be permanent going forward. No shouting, no dramatic ultimatums, just terms. When we stepped outside into the parking lot afterward, the air felt cold and sharp. Laura stopped beside her SUV. "So that's it?" she asked. "For now, you've turned us into a contract." "No," I said quietly. "We were always a contract. I just finally read it." She shook her head. "You've changed." I stopped absorbing. She studied me carefully. "You don't even seem angry." "I'm not." "Then what are you done pretending?" She looked away first. That evening back at the house, she stood in the hallway as I walked toward the den. "You could still undo this," she said. "How?" "It's for Nahan. Lift the separation. Reinstate the line. Trust me again." Trust. There it was again. What would be different? I asked. She hesitated. "I wouldn't say something like that again. That wasn't the issue." "Then what is I asked for help?" I said quietly. "And you decided it wasn't your concern." "It was one morning. It was a pattern." Her jaw tightened. "You're rewriting history." "No," I said. "I'm finally reading it." She stepped closer. "You think you're the only one who felt alone in this marriage?" That caught me off guard. "What does that mean?" "You buried yourself in numbers for decades," she said. "Retirement plans, risk management, always calculating. I learned to build something of my own. Then you should have said that I tried." When she hesitated again, and in that hesitation, I saw something real. Not manipulation, distance. Maybe she had felt invisible, too. But invisibility doesn't justify secrecy. "You didn't build something with me," I said calmly. "You built it behind me." She looked tired suddenly. "Maybe I didn't think you'd understand." "That's the part that hurts," I said quietly. "Not the money." We stood there in silence for a long moment. Then she asked softer this time. "Is this over?" I thought carefully before answering. "It's not what it was." "And what is it now?" "It's honest." She exhaled slowly. "And if honesty leads to divorce, then at least it's real." Later that night, my phone buzzed again. Not her this time. A notification from the bank. Formal confirmation, equity line permanently suspended pending joint court authorization. I stared at the message. There it was. Finality in small print. Not revenge, not triumph, just story, just structure. When I walked past the guest room, her light was still on. For a moment, I considered knocking. Instead, I went to bed because confrontation isn't about winning. It's about refusing to lose yourself quietly. And for the first time in years, I felt something unfamiliar. Not anger, not resentment, balance. The next morning, she didn't call me at all. No panic, no 31 missed calls, just silence. And sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's recalculation. 6 months passed. Not dramatically, not in flames, just steadily. The house was appraised in early spring. The market had risen more than either of us expected. Mediation continued twice a month. We moved through spreadsheets instead of arguments. In the end, I bought out her share of the house using a structured rollover from a portion of our joint brokerage account. It was clean, documented, signed in ink. She kept the SUV, the LLC, and the funds she had already transferred. The court formalized the legal separation with a clear financial boundary between us. No courtroom showdown, no slam gavels, just signatures. She moved into a downtown condo in July. I helped carry the last box to her car. That surprised her. "You don't have to," she said quietly. "I know," I replied. We stood in the driveway for a moment. Two people who had once promised forever now dividing furniture. "Was it worth it?" she asked. "Yes," I said honestly. "For what?" "For clarity." She nodded slowly. "I never meant to hurt you." "I believe that," I said. "But you did." She looked away first and then she drove off. The house felt larger without her. Not emptier, just quieter. My mother sat at the kitchen table that evening, folding a dish towel carefully. "She gone?" she asked. "Yes." She nodded as if she'd known this ending long before I did. "Are you lonely?" she asked gently. I considered the question. "No," I said finally. "I'm settled." And that was the truth. My Social Security now deposits into my individual account every month. The mortgage is paid down aggressively. The equity line remains closed. My retirement projections are modest but stable. For the first time in years, I review statements without anxiety. The LLC she built it hasn't taken off. I know because public filings show limited activity. I don't feel satisfaction about that. Just distance. We speak occasionally quarterly briefly. No accusations, nostalgia, just updates. I drove my mother to her cardiology appointment last week in my own car, transmission replaced, fully paid. On the way home, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "You look peaceful," she said. "I am." "You forgive her?" "Yes." "And yourself?" That question lingered. It took me a moment to answer. "I'm working on that." One evening in late August, Laura called. Not 31 times. Just once, I answered. "Hi," she said. "Hi." I got the mediation finalization notice. So did I. Silence. I was scared. She admitted. Of what? Of being dependent again. I thought about that. "You were never dependent," I said. "You just didn't trust that I'd stand beside you if you asked. And now, Tomasu. Now I stand beside myself first." She exhaled softly. "That sounds different." It is. We didn't say much else. When the call ended, I didn't feel regret. I felt resolution. This story doesn't end with reconciliation. It doesn't end with dramatic apologies or renewed vows. It ends with structure, with boundaries, with a man who finally understood that love without respect becomes obligation, and obligation without clarity becomes erosion. When she said, "Not my problem. Figure it out," she didn't realize she was handing me something powerful. Permission. Permission to stop absorbing, permission to stop smoothing, permission to stop assuming partnership where it no longer existed. And when she called me 31 times the next day, it wasn't because she loved me more. It was because the structure had shifted. Because for the first time in 28 years, she couldn't rely on my silence. If you've ever found yourself carrying more than your share, if you've ever ignored the numbers because confronting them felt too heavy, if you've ever mistaken endurance for strength, I understand. Sometimes strength is not raising your voice. Sometimes strength is reading the contract you've been living inside. Sometimes strength is simply saying, "Okay, I'd like to know what you think."